People say the avoidant runs from love, but that is not the full story. The deeper truth is harder to look at. What if they are not running from you at all? What if they are running from the version of themselves that starts waking up when they are with you? Think about that, because this is where it gets intense. When a deeply open and emotionally strong person enters the avoidance world, something hidden begins to move. Old pain, old fear, old need, everything they push down starts rising, and that changes the whole picture. This is not just about mixed signals. It is not just about someone acting distant. It is about an inner war that stays invisible from the outside. The avoidant may look calm, cold, or in control, but inside something very real is being shaken. They feel pulled in and pushed back at the same time. They feel drawn toward closeness, yet terrified by what closeness might expose. And when that happens, the connection can turn into something haunting, something obsessive, not because they want to own the other person, but because the connection touched a part of them they have spent years trying not to feel. Stay with this, because it goes deeper than romance. It goes deeper than attraction. Sometimes the person they cannot forget is not the one they wanted to lose. It is the one who made them feel alive in a way they can no longer deny. The avoidant personality is often misunderstood. Many people see the distance and assume it means cruelty, lack of care, or emotional emptiness. But very often, that distance is a shield. It was built over time. It came from moments when being open did not feel safe. Maybe closeness led to pain. Maybe trust was broken. Maybe emotions were ignored, mocked, or punished. So the person learned a new rule: stay guarded, stay contained, need less, feel less, expect less. From the outside, that can look like control, but underneath that control is usually a younger, more vulnerable self that once wanted love in a very pure way. That part did not die. It only got buried. It moved into the background, deep below the surface, where it still lives quietly inside their choices, reactions, and fears. This is why an avoidant can function so well in daily life and still feel deeply unsettled by intimacy. The problem is not that they have no feelings. The problem is that real feelings reach places they have worked very hard to lock away. So when someone comes along and touches those places without force, without games, without pressure, it can feel almost unbearable. And that is where this kind of story begins. Not with rejection, not with coldness, but with protection so strong that even love can feel like danger when it gets too close. When the avoidant meets someone deeply intuitive, calm, loving, and emotionally strong, the reaction is not ordinary attraction. It can feel much bigger than that. The connection seems to hit below the surface. It does not just flatter the ego, it stirs the soul. The avoidant may not know how to explain it, but they feel something different. This person does not simply offer attention. They carry qualities the avoidant lost touch with long ago: warmth without pressure, feeling without chaos, vulnerability without manipulation, presence without control. And that matters more than they can say, because what they are seeing in that person is not only beauty or kindness. They are seeing a living reflection of something they once had inside themselves, or something they always wished they could live from. That is why the pull feels so strong. It is not shallow desire, it is recognition, and recognition can be frightening when it shines light on what has been missing for years. The avoidant feels the attraction, but they also feel the threat inside it. If they move closer, they may have to face grief, fear, and the original pain that taught them to shut down. So they become torn. They lean in, then they retreat. They open slightly, then they disappear. And to the other person, it feels confusing. But inside the avoidant, something much larger is happening. A part of them is waking up, and another part is doing everything it can to push that awakening back into the dark. One of the most powerful parts of this connection is the feeling of being truly seen. For many avoidant people, that is rare, very rare. They are used to being known by role, image, function, or surface behavior. They are not used to someone sensing the hidden weight they carry without demanding a performance. But a deeply perceptive and emotionally grounded person can do exactly that. They can feel the pain behind the silence. They can sense the fear behind the distance. They can notice the longing hiding under the cool exterior. And when the avoidant realizes this, something inside them softens and panics at the same time. Because being seen is beautiful, but but it is also exposing. It means there is less room to hide. It means the defenses are no longer fully working. It means the self they built to survive is no longer the only self in the room. This is why they may suddenly pull away after moments of closeness. This is why they may go silent right when things start feeling real. It is not always because they do not care. Sometimes it is because they care so much that their system goes into alarm. Here is where it gets even deeper. The person stays in their mind afterward, not just as a memory, but as an emotional echo, in dreams, in random quiet moments, in flashes of thought during ordinary days. Because once someone has made them feel visible in a real way, they cannot easily go back to pretending they do not need that kind of connection. This is often the point where obsession begins, but not in the simple way people think. It is not always obsession with the other person as a separate human being. Very often, it is obsession with the awakened self. The avoidant becomes haunted by what the connection opened inside them. They replay the moments, the tone of voice, the calm presence, the way they felt understood without needing to explain every hidden part of themselves. And beneath all of that is one painful truth. They cannot forget how alive they felt. That is the real disturbance. The other person becomes a mirror, and the avoidant cannot stop looking into what that mirror showed them. It revealed the gap between the life they have built and the emotional truth they have buried. It showed them not only what they were missing, but who they might have been without so much fear. This is why the thoughts return, even when they try to move on. This is why distance does not always end the bond, because the bond is not only relational anymore, it has become internal. It has attached itself to identity, to longing, to possibility. The avoidant may try to suppress it. They may distract themselves. They may jump into work, routine, logic, or even another connection, but the inner pull stays active. The wound was touched, the closed door cracked open, and once that happens, the mind keeps circling back, trying to understand what it felt, why it mattered, and why nothing else seems to reach the same depth. There is another layer to this, and it matters. The connection does not just wake up desire, it also wakes up everything the avoidant has pushed away from themselves: their need for closeness, their fear of abandonment, their hidden shame, their private wish to be loved without earning it through performance. These are the parts they usually label as weakness, neediness, or danger, so they cast them aside and build a stronger outer shell. But when they meet someone who lives with emotional depth naturally, someone who can feel deeply without collapsing, those buried parts rise fast. The avoidant sees another person moving through emotional truth with honesty and steadiness, and something inside them becomes restless, agitated, divided. They may feel emotional flashbacks they do not understand. They may suddenly crave distance. They may feel irritated, overwhelmed, or strangely exposed for no clear reason. But the real reason is this: the parts they denied are no longer staying quiet. They have been activated, and once activated, they demand attention. That is why the connection feels bigger than ordinary attraction. It does not just create romance, it creates inner conflict. The person becomes symbolic. They represent freedom, vulnerability, and emotional truth all at once. The avoidant feels drawn because this person seems to hold a key. Not the key to being rescued, but the key to a version of self they have never fully integrated. And the more they resist that inner call, the stronger the fixation can become. Not because the other person is chasing them, but because the truth inside them has started to chase them. This creates a strange relationship between comfort and fear. The avoidant may feel safer with this person than with almost anyone else, and that safety itself becomes frightening. That sounds backward, but it is real. If closeness used to lead to pain, then deep safety can feel suspicious at first. The mind starts scanning. Where is the trap? When will the demand come? When will I be exposed, controlled, abandoned, or disappointed? So the avoidant begins testing the connection. Sometimes these tests are obvious: pulling away, going quiet, acting colder than they feel, delaying responses, becoming distant right after intimacy. Other times the tests are subtle: watching closely, checking whether the other person stays calm, noticing whether warmth remains when they are difficult, withdrawn, or emotionally unavailable. These tests are not always conscious. They are fear-based strategies. a way of asking, without asking, "Are you safe too? Or will you hurt me like the others did?" And when the other person responds with patience, emotional steadiness, and self-respect rather than panic or punishment, the avoidant becomes even more affected, because now the old story starts to break. They expected abandonment, they expected blame, they expected emotional chaos, but instead they meet quiet presence. That changes everything. And yes, it can deepen the obsession, because now they are not only touched by warmth, they are also stunned by consistency. They start wondering who this person is, how they remain so grounded, and why their usual defenses are not producing the same old results. Do not miss this part, because this is where fascination turns into something much more consuming. The avoidant often expects other people to collapse under distance. They are used to seeing others chase harder, react louder, or leave completely. But when someone stays centered without begging, without punishing, and without losing their dignity, the avoidant is deeply unsettled. They pay attention more than they show. They notice that their silence did not create instant rejection. They notice that their coldness did not destroy the bond in the way they expected. They notice that the other person can feel deeply and still remain whole. And that becomes almost mysterious to them, because for the avoidant, emotions have often been linked with instability. To meet someone whose emotional depth comes with steadiness, clarity, and restraint feels rare, almost unreal. This is where the mental loop intensifies. They replay interactions. They wonder what the other person is thinking. They quietly check whether that presence is still there. Outwardly, they may seem detached. Inwardly, they are captivated. The person becomes an emotional question they cannot stop asking. How can someone love without control? How can someone stay open without falling apart? How can someone see me so clearly and still not run? The avoidant may not say these questions out loud, but inside they keep returning to them again and again. And the deeper reason is not only attraction, it is revelation. The other person has shown them a kind of strength they did not know how to trust, and now they cannot fully forget it. The obsession grows because the connection has become tied to a possibility that feels both healing and dangerous, the possibility that intimacy might not destroy them after all. Even if the connection ends, the impact often does not end with it. This is one of the hardest parts to understand from the outside. The avoidant may move on in practical ways. They may return to routine, enter new connections, focus on work, or act as if the whole experience is behind them. But internally, the other person can remain vivid for a very long time, not as a fading memory, but as an active presence, a reference point, a private standard. They compare new people to that feeling. They notice when new connections look good on paper but lack depth in the body. They feel a quiet dissatisfaction they cannot easily explain, because what they miss is not just attention or chemistry. It is the stillness, the honesty, the sense of being able to exist without performance. That is rare, and once they have felt it, everything more shallow can start to feel strangely flat. This is why they may return in thought long after they have physically left. They remember specific conversations, a look, a moment of quiet understanding, the relief of not having to hide so much. Sometimes they even begin to mirror small parts of that person's way of being without fully realizing it. Their language softens, their awareness deepens, their old emotional map stops working as well as it used to. Something has shifted. That is what makes the attachment feel inescapable. It is not just about missing someone. It is about losing the ability to be fully satisfied by the old way of living once a deeper emotional truth has been tasted. At this point, the connection becomes more than a relationship. It becomes a turning point. The avoidant begins to sense that their old compass, the one built on distance, independence, self-protection, and emotional control, no longer brings the same peace. It may still feel familiar, but it no longer feels fully alive. The person they met opened a path they had never really allowed themselves to walk, a path of openness, honesty, real mutual closeness. That does not mean the avoidant suddenly becomes emotionally fluent. It does not mean they instantly heal, but but it does mean something essential has changed. Now they know there is another way to live, and that knowledge cannot be erased. This is why longing begins to replace numbness, not all at once, not cleanly, but slowly, quietly. The avoidant starts carrying a new inner question into everyday life. In moments of tension, they may think, how would that person have responded? In moments of pain, they may wonder what truth was being reflected back to them then. The other person becomes a silent guide, even in absence. And that can feel like obsession because it reaches into the very structure of how they orient themselves in the world. What once felt like strength now feels incomplete. What once felt safe now feels lonely. This inner shift is painful because it asks for more than memory. It asks for change. It asks the avoidant to stop treating their own heart like a threat. And for someone who has survived by closing down, that is one of the hardest invitations they will ever face. That is why this kind of fixation should not be reduced to simple regret or ordinary romantic longing. It is the outward sign of a deeper split becoming visible. The avoidant has spent years mastering emotional distance, often without realizing that those same defenses also kept out healing, tenderness, and self-knowledge. When someone enters their life and reflects them back with unusual gentleness and clarity, the result can feel deeply disorienting. At first, they may call it discomfort, confusion, irritation, maybe even resentment. But under those first reactions is something much more powerful, a hunger, not only for the other person, but for the version of themselves that came alive in that person's presence. This is the point many people miss. They think the avoidant is obsessed with a fantasy. Sometimes they are actually grieving a self they had buried for years. The connection briefly brought that self into the light, the one that could feel, the one that could receive love without performing, the one that did not need to hide every weakness to stay safe. Once that self has been felt, even briefly, the inner world changes. The avoidant may try to push the whole experience away. They may replace, distract, intellectualize, or minimize. But the echo keeps returning, not because they are weak, not because they failed, but because the psyche is insisting that something true has been touched, and what is true does not go quiet just because it is inconvenient. It waits, it presses, it returns. And yes, there is a painful beauty in that, because the obsession is not only suffering, it can also be the first honest movement toward integration, a doorway, even if they do not want to walk through it yet. The avoidant may never have chosen this process. They may not even have language for it, but the experience forces them to face a central question. Do they keep running from the parts of themselves that need love, or do they finally begin to turn toward them? That is why the other person becomes unforgettable. They are not only associated with affection, they are associated with truth, with the moment the walls dropped just enough for something real to be seen. And once someone has felt real inside their own skin after years of distance, it becomes much harder to return to emotional exile without consequence. The mind replays those moments not only from nostalgia, but to stay connected to the only experience that made them feel genuinely present to themselves. That is what gives the fixation its power. It is not simply asking for reunion with another person. It is asking for reunion with lost parts of the self, with the softer self, the honest self, the self that still wants closeness even after all the disappointment. This is why the story becomes bigger than romance. It becomes a story about awakening, slow, painful, inconvenient awakening, the kind that changes the meaning of everything that came before it, the kind that makes old defenses feel smaller than they used to, the kind that starts a process the avoidant can delay, deny, or resist, but can no longer fully escape. Still, this does not mean every such connection becomes healthy just because it feels deep. That part matters too. Emotional intensity is not the same as emotional maturity. A powerful bond can reveal truth, but it can also become a cycle if nothing changes. If the avoidant keeps using distance without reflection, if they keep testing without accountability, if they keep reaching back only when loneliness rises and disappearing when closeness returns, then the connection can become painful for both people. The emotionally strong person may understand the fear, but understanding does not mean endless tolerance. Care does not mean self-abandonment. Patience does not mean staying available for unresolved patterns forever. This is where many stories become tragic. The avoidant feels the depth. They know the connection matters. They may even be deeply moved by the steadiness they are receiving. But unless they begin to face their own inner world honestly, the same fear that made them obsess can also keep them from building something real. That is why this kind of story is not automatically a love story in the usual sense. Sometimes it is a transformation story first. Sometimes the greatest purpose of the bond is not union, but revelation, to show each person what still needs healing, to expose what has been denied, to bring the hidden into view. And that is why the emotional impact remains so strong even without a clear ending, because the bond did not only create desire, it created awareness. It forced old patterns into the light, and once